Is Loree McBride more just than God? This question is the crux of this trial, where Loree McBride alleges she's justified to have interfered with the love between Brent Spiner and me, Gail Chord Schuler, when she drug-raped him in September 1992. Brent Spiner has a clone. Brent and I have had a relationship since 1990, and Loree McBride has stolen most of Brent Spiner's income. Now she alleges she was justified to commit all these crimes because she had to rescue Brent from my Christianity. She claims that those who believe in God are mentally ill and need intervention from people like her to rescue us from going deeper into mental illness. She alleges that I have poisoned Brent Spiner's mind and made him mentally ill because he's rejected most of his fame and is currently studying for the ministry at Dallas Theological Seminary. She says it's people like us, Brent and I, that cause tragedies like what happened at Parkland, Florida, because we won't support the gun control laws needed to stop such crimes, because we believe that God tells us in the Bible that we need guns to defend ourselves. And so she claims she's been justified to interfere with Brent and I over the years to ensure that proper gun control laws can be enforced. She says her raping and control over Brent is all about the issue of gun control, which most Bible believers oppose. That a rape of Brent was her therapy to cure him of mental illness, which I inflicted on him by my Christian influence. But this does not justify her orchestrating the Parkland, Florida shooting incident. She says born-again Christians are insane because God doesn't answer prayer. Back in 1979, I prayed to God just before a Wednesday evening prayer service that if he wanted me to attend Baptist University of America to give me a sign in a Wednesday evening service, September 1979, at South Dade Baptist Church, Homestead, Florida, with Pastor Charles Cooey. So I went to church, and we had a surprise guest speaker, Dr. Roger Ellison, Executive Vice President of Baptist University of America at the time. The passages of Scripture that he used for the message were the exact same passages that I'd been reading that evening right before I left for church. I packed my bags and took the next Delta Airlines flight to Atlanta, got disowned by my family because I had to turn down an acceptance to Air Force Officers Training School in Lackland, Texas, in order to attend Baptist University in Atlanta. I had $20 on me by the time I got to Baptist University. My entire first month at Baptist University, for almost every chapel service, the message in the service would be about a passage of Scripture that I'd read that morning from my devotions. I graduated from BUA in 1983. God used my training there to mold me into the pastor's wife, my husband is Brent Spiner, and writer that I am today. With a background like this, is it any wonder I turned down Brent Spiner when he propositioned me over the phone? So Loree, she's putting junk in the air, bombs. So Loree, because I turned down a rich and famous man for sex to be true to my Christianity, I'm insane? So if a person rejects fame and riches for their faith, they're insane? I'll admit I was angry at God for allowing me to marry a douchebag who was actually sexually abusing my son at this time, and I didn't know it. I prayed every day in my youth that I'd only marry in God's will. So, because I got a douchebag, God is dead? It was his will for me to marry a self-righteous pedophile douchebag to eliminate self-righteousness in my life. If Brent tried to court me in my 20s, I would have slapped a door in his face forever. A hardcore Christian, his cigarette smoking, his use of curse words, his sometimes listening to rock music, etc., would have so turned me off, I would have dumped him into the nearest trash bin if he propositioned me. The mere fact that he was an actor who worked for evil Hollywood would have been enough for me to reject him forever. My prejudice against his connections and lifestyle would have totally blinded me to his beautiful heart. God used my rigid douchebag husband to cure me of self-righteousness. And so I wrote this actor who had a beautiful heart that my douchebag husband did not have, not for romance, but to help me find myself. In the process, Brent and I fell in love with each other long distance. Brent cured me of my obsession with rigidity and I cured him of Hollywood's obsession with fame and riches. We both strengthened each other in areas where we both were weak. I'll admit that I so deeply loved Brent that if I was not attending Ralph and Lou Cetera revival services at Open Door Baptist Church in Linwood, Washington, when he propositioned me on the phone in June 1991, I may have said yes to Brent. But God spoke to me clearly during the revival that he approved of Brent's love for me, but I must not have sexual relations with him at this time. Whenever I prayed during an invitation call during this revival, people would flood the altars to get right with God. The main sin boy, she's putting guck in my throat, that Loree. The main sin preached against was pride. Pride was considered the root sin that causes all other sins, and God told me that because there wasn't an ounce of pride in my feelings for Brent or his for me, that he supported our love. In summer 1993, my son had a terrible asthma attack. He was hospitalized for asthma and pneumonia. During this time, Loree McBride tied up Brent in her basement and starved him, trying to force him to eat and ingest her brain control drugs. He went for about a week with no food rather than take her drugs. Brent threw all her syringes down the toilet, so she was unable to inject the drugs into him, which infuriated her. After starving him for a week, she gave up and let him go. He called me on the phone when he got out and made love to me on the phone to make up for his silence when my son was hospitalized. Loree then called me on the phone at midnight and screeched in a loud, deep, frustrated, furious voice, "Hey, bitch, what the fuck are you doing to my boyfriend?" I thought at the time it was some crazy woman at Paramount. So I told Brent about it in a letter to him and laughed, knowing he'd never find a woman like that attractive. Unfortunately, the hospital was concerned that I didn't bring my son straight to the ER instead of to the doctor, and they made me see a social worker named Jordan Friedman. Jordan said I seemed very stressed out, and he wanted to know why. Well, Brent called me every week, and I hadn't heard from him for about 2 weeks now, and I was afraid I was getting a repeat of September 1992, when Brent gave me 3 weeks of silence. I confessed this to the social worker under confidentiality. My husband was out at sea at this time. In November 1993, my health insurance leaked some paperwork that Jordan Friedman had written in violation of his promise to keep this a secret, that mentioned how I felt that I had a relationship with a Star Trek character, and my husband got the letter in the mail. My husband had already demanded that I not write Brent, so my evil husband now forced me to give Brent's Paramount Studios sandmail address to him, and he composed a nasty letter to Paramount Studios demanding that Brent leave me alone and that he was prepared to give Brent bad publicity if Brent and I communicated. He also threatened to divorce me if I wrote Brent, so I wrote Brent through Gates McFadden instead, because I'd heard her voice on the phone, so I knew she was Brent's friend. Around December 7th, 1993, Brent flew to Seattle. My son told me, "Mommy, somebody just said your name outside our door." I looked through the door's peephole and saw nobody. So I went to my son's bedroom window, and Brent was inside a white truck parked in the parking lot right in front of the window. He was dressed in character, I think, for his play Every Good Boy Deserves a Favor, wearing a black wig and mustache, but looked very handsome. He was in a brand new white truck. When I peeked through the blinds to look at him, he flashed the lights inside his truck on and off so I could see him. Then he backed down and zoomed out the parking lot. On Saturday, January 15th, 1994, we got a FedEx letter at dinner time at our door. It was a legal notice written by a woman Paramount Studios attorney that forbade me or my husband from contacting Paramount Studios, accusing me and my husband of harassment, saying that Brent never contacted me in any form and had only sent me an autographed photo. I recall laughing to myself because I never got an autographed photo. I got a letter from Brent. My ex read it to me and gave me the letter. I assured him I would never contact Paramount ever again, and I never did after this. In disgust, I brought that letter to the nearest trash bin and threw it out. It was my way of dropping Brent forever. The next day, January 16th, 1994, after church, I leaned over my futon sofa and cried with tears for 3 hours. "Oh God, forgive me for disgracing your name by my adulterous long-distance relationship with Brent Spiner." I knew Brent called me and made love on me on the phone, love to me on the phone from 1991 to 1993. But I did notice he didn't sign that notice, that legal notice I got. But nevertheless, I was disgusted with him and Paramount over this. The next day, on January 17th, 1994, my son came running to me. I was outside, and he said, "Mommy, Mommy, a big earthquake just hit Los Angeles." I went inside and turned on the television and learned that an earthquake had hit Northridge, California around 4 a.m. while I was asleep. It hit 12 hours after I ended my 3-hour prayer. I was astonished that God answered the prayers of me, an adulterous, horrible sinner. My first thought was, I hope Brent's okay. The next day, Monday, January 17th, 1994, the phone rang many times, like how Brent used to call me. And I picked it up, and there was a blank on the other end, but I heard these noises on the phone, kind of like beep, 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 squiggly sounds. And I'd never heard sounds like this on my phone before. And I thought, why, that clever Brent. He sent me that FedEx letter so he could put a wiretap on my phone. That's what I thought back then. I figured out that I could dial my own number and talk to the blank, and Brent would be on the other end listening to me. And this was how I communicated with Brent from January 1994 to around 2001. I'd just dial my own number and talk to the blank, and Brent would listen to me at all hours of the day and night. You know, I read in the paper later that the only Hollywood people who died in that Northridge earthquake worked for Paramount Studios. Later in 2000, God told me to divorce my evil Jesuit husband, David Schuler. But my husband dragged Brent into the divorce, forcing me to see a court psychologist for evaluation. I didn't know that my husband had also sexually abused my son. The Jesuits rewrote some of my statements at this time, and their machinations caused me to lose custody of my son. But an earthquake hit Seattle while I was going through this divorce. On February 28, 2001, it was Ash Wednesday. We got catastrophic damage, but nobody died in the earthquake. I felt the tremors, but suffered no damage whatsoever. God does answer prayer. There's evidence in the Northridge and Ash Wednesday earthquakes. And now I've supplied the backstory behind both earthquakes that prove the existence of God and whose side he's on. You might say, but we've got evidence that scientists can cause earthquakes. Yes, that technology does exist. But Brent and I didn't know of this technology in 1994 or 2001 for both of the earthquakes mentioned. And why would the Jesuits want to orchestrate earthquakes that make it appear God's against them? So we know God sent the Northridge and Ash Wednesday earthquakes. Is Loree McBride justified to interfere with the love between Brent and I? God obviously says no. So the question before us is, who's more righteous, God or Loree McBride? If you claim Loree's justified to interfere with the love between Brent and I, you're stating that Loree is more righteous than God because God obviously condemns her for this. This God who does exist, who does answer prayer, and who has opinions, has made his opinion known. He's against Loree McBride and her terrorism and her crimes against the love between Brent and myself. So you must choose between God and Loree McBride. God doesn't hate Loree McBride, but he hates her sin, and she loves her sin. That's the problem.